said loudly to Mr. Korbeliff in French. "She's making barbaric noises." No, Aunt. Soyez tranquille. He leant across to talk to me. He was in his late 50s, I supposed, but seemed younger, with the same dark brown eyes as Pasha. He pulled Dima to him and stroked his cheek. "They are good children, though perhaps a little wild, eh, you monkeys? You see, Miss Freely, their poor mother is ill, and I'm very often away on business. They've not had an easy childhood." "My mother has neurasthenia," Sonia said. "She has to stay in bed most days, although now and again she manages a meal downstairs. If there's anything you need, my father is the one to approach. Now, let me show you to your room." Governesses are famously long-lived. When I met her in 1914, the Korbeliff's retired governess, Mamselle, was in her mid-80s, timid and furry as a vole, and still running errands for the whole family. As I write this, I am not far from 80 myself. A whole lifetime has passed since I went to Russia. My daughter Sophie has grown-up sons of her own. My husband, Paul, died 6 months ago, and since then I have the strange sensation that the present, my creaky old body in the little terraced house in Hackney that we bought together, is no longer my home. For several months, Sophie has been trying to persuade me to clear the attic of a lifetime of accumulated papers, and I have been feebly resisting. She is quite right that it must be done, of course. I knew that. I'm merely taking a moment to gird up my loins before I dredge Slavkin's story up from its decades of silence. Last week, Sophie, running out of patience, hauled several boxes down and left them by my chair. "Have a look through, Mama, and on Saturday I can throw out what you don't want to keep." All week I rehearse how I'm going to open the conversation with Sophie. Paul wanted us to tell her everything years ago, but I persuaded him it would be too confusing, too painful. Now he's gone. It is frankly a worse moment than ever to begin, but I have no choice. I find myself writing an account for her instead, using the papers as my starting point. This way, I think, will be more truthful. We were at the Korbeliff's country estate, Mikhailovka, when the war began. I remember so vividly where we were sitting, looking down to the bend in a stream where the cattle were drinking. Mr. Korbeliff stepped out onto the veranda, rubbing his forehead. "Dears, it has happened. Russia has declared war on Germany." The prospect of war had been hanging over us, and we felt a sort of ghastly relief when it was finally announced. I thought about, but dismissed the idea of going home. I was enjoying myself, and like everyone, I was convinced that it would be a short war. Nikita Slavkin sat a little apart from Pasha's other friends, arms wrapped around his long, knobbly legs, pale and awkward. He had very short, almost colourless hair that revealed a bumpy scalp, slightly protruding pale blue eyes. When the conversation turned to women's rights, Pasha drew him in. "Nikita here has some ideas, don't you, Nikita? He's inventing all sorts of contraptions that will change women's lives, and all our lives. Come over here, tell us." Nikita stood upright. He was absurdly tall and skinny, and blushed even under his hair. When he spoke, his voice was strangely deep and a little too loud. He looked embarrassed by that too. "Well, one of my inventions is a lightweight chastity belt woven out of steel thread." The room erupted into protest. Everyone was disgusted, either on liberal, conservative, or squeamish grounds. Mr. Korbeliff's aunt, Anna Vladimirovna, wanted him thrown out of the house. Pasha laughed so much he fell off the divan. Slavkin stood there, his large hands hanging by his sides, vulnerable. "Of course, I have not perfected the material yet." A neighbour of the Korbeliffs, Marina Gertler, who was studying medicine, looked as though she might punch him. "Don't you see? Modern women need freedom," she hissed. His full, pale lips trembled a little. I do see, yes. But that's my aim. Slavkin had just moved into the small bedroom next to mine, which Mr. Korbolev had offered him in exchange for a few hours' work a week on his catalogue. At 22, the same age as me, he was 4 years older than Pasha and seemed a decade wiser. A scholarship student from Siberia, studying physics and engineering at Moscow University, he was already known to many of the artists and poets in the avant-garde for his inventions, which he claimed would drive forward the steamer of modernity. But he was not, at first, a popular addition to Gagarinsky Lane. Sonia made it clear that she found Slavkin uncouth, while Anna Vladimirovna claimed his village voice gave her headaches. The loyal Pasha, however, wouldn't hear a word said against his friend. He teased Sonia and Anna Vladimirovna about their attitude, which he claimed was a medical condition, snobbosis. The two young men were inseparable. It was Pasha who gave Nikita the nickname Camel. Legs and eyelashes, he explained. Although he also described Nikita as a mythical creature. Half Moses and half the camel he rode on, with a heart made entirely of little fluffy puppies. As I read my letters, I strain to catch again a whiff of the stuffy, overheated air of Mr. Korbolev's dark green study, lit by the rosy glow of the large, fringed brass lamp.